Good evening. This is part three of my deep dive, the Manson hole. Okay. And today we're going to go from August 1st, 1968 to January 1st, 1969. And we'll sort of call this Manson Family Values. Okay. So there were values of the Manson family. Um, so we'll start with. Dennis Wilson leaves the home on 14400, I'm sorry, Sunset Boulevard in the Pacific Palisades section of Los Angeles, and the family was run out. Um, but the relationship basically was still there, even though the Manson family had ran up over $100,000 bill at Dennis Wilson's house. Dennis moved to Malibu, and a couple of guys kicked the Manson family out. However, there was still a relationship between Charlie and Dennis Wilson. Um, so they get him in the studio, and the studio is basically a home built studio by the Beach Boys genius founder Brian Wilson, and it's in Brian Wilson's house. Um, so I get him in the studio with a guy named Mike Despar, who's a sound engineer, and problems arise. A lot of problems arise, and basically Manson doesn't like to take direction. So for instance, he says to Charlie when he's playing his guitar, he's on the microphone. He says, "Charlie, could you get a little closer to that microphone?" And Manson gets mad. And he also would say, Charlie, that take, let's do that one again. A little brighter and stronger in the vocals." And Manson, of course, gets again to one point. Manson pulled a knife on uh, Mike Despar, and Despar got so upset that when they just quit and walked out, um, a lot of people, later on, after years later, Neil Young commented he thought Manson was very talented, but he acted like he was entitled to everything. He was just a peon at this point. He had really nothing. Marilyn Wilson, who was Brian Wilson's wife, also didn't like the hanger-ons with Manson, the Manson hippie girls who had a foul odor to them. They didn't take showers much, so it was said that after they would leave for that particular recording session, she would go around the house and scrub the toilets, spray the house with disinfectant and such. Okay, so finally, Brian, the thing with Mike Despar, and he decides to have a man to man with Manson. He sits Charlie down. He says, "Listen, Charlie, you're a talented guy. We really want to work with you, but you got to change a couple of things. You got to get your hair cut. You got to take showers. You got to dress presentably. In fact, for the haircut, there's a guy I know. You could go to this guy named Jay Sebring." Okay. So if you don't know who he is, he'll come back later in the story. Okay. Um, so the Manson family at this point has nowhere to go, and so by chance, they get in the bus, and the bus breaks down, and so Sandra Good, and we'll talk more about her, one of the Manson's most devoted followers, says, I know this really good mechanic. He's at the Spawn Ranch, and he's around Spawn Ranch in Chatworth, California, which is it's northwest, about 45 minutes from central LA. And so Manson goes over there, and he's really impressed by this place. It's still in the LA area, but it's like it's a old movie ranch. And the old movie has all the the fake sets, and it has a motel, it has a casino, it has a saloon. Except they're fakes, replicas built for the movies, and it was used in the 50s and 60s. such shows as Bonanza, The Lone Ranger. But the Western motif had fallen out of favor with the film industry, and Manson, in fact, the way they made money at Spahn Ranch was basically renting horse rides for $1.25, 250 on the weekends. um, and the owner and the proprietor was a guy named George Spahn, who was 80 years old and was nearly blind. And Manson hatched a plan to talk to Mr. Spahn, and he said to Mr. Spahn, "If we don't have any money, but is it possible we could come and live on the ranch, and we'll make it up to you cleaning up, and we'll have a personal assistant to you." Hint, hint. um, Manson convinces Mr. Spahn that he uh, to take them in for the free room and board. So, um, and originally it was funny because Manson said to Mr. Spahn he'd have about 5 or 6 people, because really at that point the family was at 18 to 26 people, and he used deception, which we know Charlie likes to do. Um, so let's stop here and talk about Manson family values. Um, Now, the good thing about Spawn Ranch is Manson could really isolate his followers. It was it was far away enough from civilization. It was that even though it was very close to the music industry ties that he had developed, it still was far enough that he could practice some of the techniques he had been honing over the years. And the first thing. Uh, he wanted to isolate his followers from the outside world, and so no clocks, no newspapers. Don't bring up any of your past history, and keep everyone busy. Um, when by giving them chores to do. So Also, another thing he would do is give everyone new names. This is in dispute, as we'll talk about later. When we come to the end of our story, we'll talk about cracks in the narrative. People saying, "Oh, that's not true. That's not true." um, so, One of the things was okay. Manson sometimes would have the girls go into town and panhandling. So attractive girls go. People gave him money, but interestingly enough, he always sent them out with a guy. Someone one with a guy. They all went with a guy. So it might have been 5 or 6 of them, and they all went with a guy. And the reason for that, he didn't allow the girls to carry money, and there's a really interesting reason for that. There were no cell phones back then. He didn't want any of the girls to contact anyone from the outside or have money to get into a cab or an Uber. Well, no Ubers back then. But so that was one rule. The women weren't allowed to carry money. So he's using some of his pimp techniques to get try to, as much as possible, not allow the girls to escape his clutches. So when new members came in, also story of one new member, she had some money like $10,000. She had some credit cards, and they all went to the Manson family communal trust, as we should say. um, Now, one of Manson's biggest preaching things was ego death, giving up your ego. Um, and the key to enlightenment, according to Manson, was to surrender your ego. And to surrender your ego, you had to realize that you are not separate from anyone else or the whole. Everyone is the same. So you had to, and when people weren't obeying him, he would just say, "Oh, you haven't surrendered your ego yet." That was one of his tricks. Um, and one of the other things with Manson was everything. Don't talk about the past. Focus on the present. A lot of self-help gurus, including Sam Harris, said that's a little Manson in a lot of people. Um, Emotions are. Emotions are transitory states, so they shouldn't be taken too seriously. Um, Give up on validation, so don't be looking for people to compliment you. Um, or if they get mad at you, they're just transitory. They'll go away, and you'll be the same as before. Um, Another thing, Manson, this teaching really was one of the ones that. And by the way, you should realize these teachings were given to the followers when they were soaked up on LSD. So, these might seem kind of ridiculous or, something, it's a big deal. But one of his biggest following, life and death are the same thing. um, you're the same, life and death, same thing. So, if someone's dead, they're, in life, same situation. um, so group sex, Manson was big into that, and he um, he would, you say you go with her, and he goes with this woman, and he would um, he would select who he'd have sex with. Now, you could say a lot of things about Manson. He was a racist, he was an anti-Semite, but you can't say he was a homophobe because bisexuality was openly practiced and by Manson. Another thing he'd like to do is so they were starting to have some children, including his own, on the ranch. He had a baby with Mary Bruner, Michael Bruner, and one of the things he believed in was communal baby care. He did not believe that a baby, once Mary had the baby, that she should be raised by the parents because he believed that the parents' attitudes would harm the baby. So all babies would be raised, taken away from the parents, and be raised communally. No books. I think we mentioned that, except for one book, the Bible. Okay, that was the only book that Manson thought was any good. No eyeglasses. So if you had, like me, if you had bad eyesight, well, too bad. You got to see the world as it really is to you. Okay. Um, um, yeah, we talked about the giving the people a safe name. No sense makes sense. Okay, sense and logic are an illusion. You know, so they're just an illusion. And if someone shoots a bullet at me, that's just an illusion. So no sense makes sense. In fact, that's one of the names to the podcast. It's a podcast or Facebook page. No sense makes sense. It's a famous. Thing. And another important one is fear. Manson was really into fear. He said animals had fear all the time. And, for instance, he would talk about how the coyote was totally aware, and snakes. And he said fear, if you had very little fear, you had very little awareness. If you had more fear, you had a lot of awareness. Total fear was total awareness. So the key was to get yourself in a fearful state, as we'll see in the next part four, what he was talking about with that. And all that, more fear, the more awareness, the more love. Okay? Um, so he's at the Spawn Ranch now. He's setting himself up in the fall of '68, and all of a sudden, bikers would come around, and they started to notice things he didn't like. They would bring beer, and he didn't like alcohol. Manson supposedly, and all these things we'll see that Manson didn't like. He used at times, um, and they would sometimes date the girls, and he was scared. Sometimes he was scared, if a girl went out with one of the bikers, that they'd never come back. He'd start losing his hold on the people, control. Um, so he was a little worried about that. Um, so what he did was he started telling some of it. He had recruiters actually, Manson. A lot of people put him down as he was a pretty clever guy. A lot of people don't give credit, but he had actually got two recruiters. Um, One guy, little Paul Watson, okay, and he wrote a book about his time in the family. and Gypsy or Catherine Share. Um, he said to him, um, don't take, don't recruit more women at this point. Um, so he's really worried about all these bikers coming around, and he wanted to isolate himself a little more. So what he did was, he's thinking, and all of a sudden, one of the followers, Kathy Gillies, mentioned, "Oh, old grandma's house," and he said to her, "Where's that?" She said, "In Death Valley." Ding, 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 ding. So Manson started, crying, and he found out her grandmother had a place to go to in Death Valley called the Myers Ranch. Okay, so they get there. Some of the bunch of them go out to the Myers Ranch in Death Valley, and some of them stay in Spawn Ranch. There's always a little presence in Spawn Ranch. So they go there. He likes it, but there's a ranch across the way he likes even more called the Barker Ranch, owned by a woman called Arlene Barker. And gets in contact with Arlene, Miss Barker, and he asks if they could stay at the ranch. And he cries her. He gives her one of the one of the Beach Boys gold records that Dennis Wilson owned that he stole from when they were at the Dennis Wilson's house in '68. Before the summer, I'm sorry, spring of '68. Um, um, so he gives the gold record, and he barters a few other things, and he gets permission to stay. Um, but the members of the family started to complain. It was getting cold. There were a lot of spiders, snakes, scorpions. Not fun. And all cooking had to be done on this wood stove. And so to work the wood stove, you had to get wood, which is not easy to come by in the desert. So there's a lot of hardships. The night got very cold, especially you're talking about fall to winter of any desert season. So the harsh living conditions. But Manson had promised him of something called the Hole, which we'll talk about in part four. And temporarily, it relieved the followers' fears. Um, but Manson then was starting to get into problems of his own living in the desert. So one of the things he used to get hold over his followers were drugs, and the drug trade in the desert wasn't very good. So especially for LSD, there's a few towns around, but they were small, and there really wasn't any drug dealers. So Manson decides to change plans. He tells his followers that, which he did. In fact, one day, Dennis Wilson and Greg Jacobson come to Barker Ranch and told him one of his songs would be recorded and would be a single. And this gave him kind of the excuse to say, we got to move back to the Spawn Ranch. Um, so, um, and also, he said, "Oh, the other reason, one of the other reason again, no, you're right, it's too cold out here for Charlie. Too cold for Charlie. We got to move back." Um, but comes back and late November, I think it was early November, goes to Spawn, and Spawn didn't want him back at this time. He only would allow, I guess part of the thing he was tricked. He only wanted a limited number of members, so he said I can only take 4 or 5. Squeaky, of course, because Squeaky did things for him, those kinds of things, and cooked, cleaned for him, and maybe 2 or 3 others. But otherwise, he wasn't having it this time. Um, so what happened was, so Manson, they actually had some money at this point, through, I guess, one or two rich girls came into the thing. So they rented a house in Canoga Park for a few months until January 1969. Um, now, Manson finds out so in late December of '69, uh, the Beach Boys, before they released their main album, released two singles off it. One of the singles contains on the A side a song called "Bluebirds Over the Mountain," which is a cover, and on the B side contains his song, which is "Never Learn or Cease to Exist," which was later turned into "Never Learn Not to Love." So he notices when he gets the single, he doesn't have a credit on it. He's the songwriter. And when he plays it, they changed the lyrics, the one thing he told them not to do. So Manson's furious at this point. Okay. And at this point, usually what it would happen at this point, Manson would fly off the handle, and he would do something like something, slash him with tires or whatever, murder someone. He decided to play it cool because he knew Wilson still was best friends with Terry Melcher, and if you maybe cut that tie, that could be a problem. So cleverly, he did not act on his impulses for once. Okay. Okay. So this brings us to the end of part two. And part three, I'm hoping to do January 1st, 1969 to June, but a lot of things happen, so I might not get to it. It says a six-part series. We might run over that, but that was my original goal. So I will see what happens. But today is actually September 14th, 2025. I'm the king of all mediums, and I thank you for stopping by and see you real soon. Bye bye.